Hey there. How are you today? My name's Lisa Kirsch Satawa, and I am um, coming to you live on Facebook on this beautiful sunny day to continue to talk about um, school law education issues for special needs children. As you all know, at Kirsch Daskas, we take this very seriously. We have developed a different approach for different learners, and we provide a whole gamut of services, but mostly we want to educate you as parents to be the best you can be for your kids. Our motto is to plan, prepare, and advocate. And we are creating an IEP toolkit that, along with these seminars or whatever we're calling them that we do every day, can really help you as parents be educated. And in some areas, especially what we're going to talk about today, you may even know more than the people on the team who are in the room. Kind of our golden rules of being a parent, to be part of the team, is do not do not leave your your strong beliefs in who your child is and what your child can do at the door. You leave your emotions at the door. You bring that sense of passion to advocate for your child to the meeting. You're your child's first teacher. You have the most contact with him or her. You know what they can do. You know what they can't do when they're at home. You've been watching them learn for years before they ever go to school. So now that they're in school, you are an equal part of this team. You are a required part of this team. So do not just bow down and give and defer to the team if you disagree, because you count the same as they do, and they can't have an IEP meeting without you. You are absolutely part of that team. The other golden rule, after don't be completely deferential to the educators, is to write notes. If it's not written down, it didn't happen. You have nothing you can enforce if it isn't written down. I'm a huge believer in parents having logs, calendars, and journals, along with their organized toolkit that they bring to the meeting. So we've done a lot of talking about advocacy and different ways to advocate, and how you can think out of the box and you can make suggestions and all of those things in the last few days. And today we're going to talk about tests and measurements. And this is a huge topic. So it probably will, today we'll go through some initial tests and measurements and evaluations, kind of just skim the surface. We'll talk a little bit about statistics and everything I never wanted to do again in my life. So I became a lawyer, and here I am having to do it. Um, and then starting on Monday, we'll talk about bell curve and standard deviation and some of those other mathy type words that I never uh, ever wanted to have to know about. But I'm going to now explain to you why they're important for you to understand, because sometimes when we're looking at um, data and we see that a child is in the first percentile, it can send you into total panic when, and then you realize that that's a test that was given to the gen ed population, and your child didn't have any supports, accommodations, or modifications. So, of course, they're going to be a very low percentile when they're not being compared to similarly situated children, or if there aren't accommodations made to level the playing field. So that's why it's really important to know what these tests are and how they're measured and what they measure. Um, so it's also important that if you feel as a parent that you are seeing something different at home during homework time, or any activity outside of school that is not consistent with what you're hearing is happening in school, you need to bring that to the team's attention, because sometimes that's a sign that what is in place isn't the right thing, and that um, you're comparing your child constantly. You see your child on the playground, you see the other child on the playground. One of them can, run around with the spinny thing and jump on without stopping it, and another child has to have it really, really slow and they step on. And you don't know if that's because they're afraid or because physically it's not processing for them to be able to instantly do that. So it's really important to take note of these differences, whatever they may be, and to explain, if you feel that, it's the end of first grade and your child still isn't reading, and you need to bring that up. And if they say, well, when Billy's in school, Billy can read 10 sight words. Well, at the end of first grade they should be able to read many more than 10 sight words. So that's an area that needs to be evaluated, and that's when the tests, the measurements, the evaluations come into play. Anytime there's a question about progress, like right now, and I apologize for being a broken record on this point, but we don't know where our kids are now. It was not planned, they were not prepared, and certainly there were not uh, adaptations made in a timely manner, if they were at all, for children with special needs to learn at home or to have distance learning. So, if they were making progress before distance learning, we may not know because it may not have been enough time for there to have been an observation or a measurement of the progress or lack thereof before the distance learning. Then we had distance learning. We know that our children did not receive what they would have received if they were in a brick and mortar building, and that wasn't the requirement. The IDEA is silent as to what was required for the school to provide to special ed children. If they are providing education to the general ed population, they must provide general education to the special ed population. But how individualized was it? I'm going to go out on a limb here and say for most kids, it wasn't. A lot of kids couldn't do what was being sent home for them to do. So we have this issue with baseline data and it not being accurate because it's not timely, it's stale, and so we don't know where a lot of our kids are now. So we should make sure that we're asking for evaluations, that we're asking for testing, that ordinarily you might not need every year or every 6 months or every 10 months. You might need it every 3 years. But this isn't a normal year. And if I think that we're doing kids a huge disservice if we allow the team to formulate the plan for the year without having verified objective data that has measured progress. And that objective data, it comes from tests and um, measurements, and partly from evaluations, but evaluations is more to um, the tests and are part of the evaluation. The evaluation is more of an umbrella that's over all of the testing, that you interpret it all together to figure out what's really going on. Um, if it's a situation where you have concerns about progress and the IEP team disagrees, if they say that your expectations are too high, that you don't understand your child's limitations, if you push your child, you're going to damage them. These are things that I hear from people all the time. Um, don't stop. If you believe that your child doesn't have the basic skills that they are supposed to have, reading, writing, arithmetic, um, you need to push for that to happen. Don't let the team put talking books in place because your child can't read and not teach them how to read. That is something that is undisputed. Every child is supposed to learn how to read, regardless of what the disability is. Do not let the team lower the bar. Just because we have substitute technology to make it easier, it doesn't mean it's supposed to make it non-existent. So be careful of that. So when we're looking at at different things, we look at the purpose is to develop an appropriate education program. And so in order to do that, the bedrock is to understand your child's strengths and weaknesses and understand that every strength does not make you Superman and every weakness does not mean you're exposed to kryptonite. So we are going to kind of learn about this, understanding that we're looking for the appropriate education because that's what the law guarantees. Not the best your child can do. It's the appropriate education, and it's access to education, access to learning. How does your child learn? How does your child need to be taught? And tomorrow we'll learn what all those awful words mean. Well, not tomorrow, Monday. Standard deviation, standard scores, grade equivalence, age equivalence, percentiles, averages, mean. We'll talk about all that on Monday. Today, we're basically just going to learn about the different tests and what the measures measure. And we try to give you tools so that you can change your child's life by understanding what is actually being measured and what it means. And a lot of these tests are, for example, reading comprehension is a really difficult thing to test because if a child lacks mastery with reading comprehension, there's many reasons that I'm going to go into in a few minutes that are difficulty or struggles in reading comprehension. There's a lot of variables, but we'll get to that in a minute. Basically, if you understand about the measurements and the testing, then you should be able to answer questions like, how is your child functioning compared to children of the same age, compared to children of the same grade? How much educational progress has your child made since the child was last tested? If your child is receiving special education services, has your child progressed or regressed in their programming? If your child's age and grade equivalent test scores have increased, has your child made progress at the same pace or a different pace from their peer group? And so obviously it's important to measure apples to apples, and some of these tests do that better than others. But I want you to remember there's lots of ways to say the same thing. One example that we hear all the time is when you're measuring growth. You can use a ruler, you can use a yardstick, you can use a piece of string, you can use, many different things. You can describe it as, if someone is 60 inches tall, someone is 5 feet tall, someone is, a yard and 2 feet, all right, 2 feet tall. You could convert it to centimeters. So there's lots of ways to skin this cat, and they're all the same thing. It's the same kid at the same height. You're just describing it differently. And that's what a lot of these test scores do. So that's important to understand. So there's a set of scales that are used for most of these tests, and they're psychological and educational achievement test scores. They're different. You can't judge educational or academic criteria on a psychological scale. You have to make sure that you're using what is the same topic that is for that particular instrument. The standardized educational achievement tests are administered to all students. They're general measures. They can suggest that a child has a problem, and that, but it can't necessarily tell you what the problem is. It can show a weakness, but you need to do individual testing, additional testing, in order to diagnose the problem or to develop a treatment plan. And that's really important to understand, is that this general standardized testing that we see all the time, um, if your child is off the charts or below the charts, both of those are signs that you may need to adjust the curriculum or their access to education. Either they need to be more challenged or they need more supports. But both of those categories of kids should not be just lumped in the middle, because they should be able to have access to things that are appropriate for the individual child. Schools are required to use a variety of individually administered tests to determine if a child has a disability and if the disability adversely affects their educational performance. Um, a child should always be evaluated with more than one test. Um, and they should also always be evaluated by different people. It shouldn't be the same one person administering every test that the child takes. Um, you really need to understand your child's disability, and how it affects learning. As much as they're trying to figure it out, you need to know and understand that as a parent as well. We talked about ADHD at length, and that that's just the best example of a disability that every child has a different it just manifests differently in every child, and the symptomology is different in every child. um, and so some kids are diagnosed ADHD because of processing delays. Some kids are ADHD because of focusing issues. um, so it just there's just a gamut of different attributes that come with being ADHD that you can't generalize. And so this testing is very critical to help you identify and understand the disability and how it affects learning. Um, and incumbent in understanding their disability and how it affects learning, you'll be able to identify your child's strengths and weaknesses. And remember that they can have a strength and a weakness in the uh, same area. Like they could be able to read out loud, but they cannot read to themselves. Are they not reading to themselves because they can't focus? They don't know the words, they can't sound them out, they have a time constraint. There's a lot of different factors going in there. Is it processing delay, that when they hear themselves talk, they can process and understand, but when they're reading it to themselves, they can't? So there's testing that can, when you do them in a collaborative manner, that you can identify these little nuances in what the disability is and how it's affecting education, or learning or being taught. The idea is to figure out which skills need to be remediated and which skills need to be excelled. So um, basically, what do tests measure? Uh, they don't always measure what they appear to measure, and not all tests measure reading, writing, and math comprehensively. Sometimes it's pieces of reading, writing, and math that they're testing for. Um, for example, if it's I told you reading comprehension is a big one that we see, um, can manifest itself differently, and it's not always what it appears to be. So, a child who has poor reading comprehension may not understand as well, when they read silently as when they read aloud. I said that already. They may have difficulty understanding what they've read because they're working too hard to recognize the words. They may have gaps in phonics skills, and it may not be recognition of words. There may be a sound issue. So that's when we look at these tests, they don't always measure what they appear to measure. So the first one that we see often is that the Woodcock Reading Mastery Test, known as the WRMT-R. And that's used, it's an educational achievement test, very, very widely used. It has several subtests that are part of it: a letter identification, word identification, nonsense words, which parents are always asking me, why do they test nonsense words? Because they want to know if your child can read words that don't make sense, that aren't real. Uh, and it allows the evaluator to see if the child recognizes words without compensatory strategies like pictures or guessing at based on context or reading sight words. It allows the evaluator to really see if when your child sees a word out of context, if it is possible that they can figure it out. A child will be cued to move on after 5 seconds with a nonsense word if they can't figure it out. The Woodcock also has a word comprehension and a passage comprehension section. The next test is the Gray Oral Reading Test. Fourth edition is the most recent. It's called the GORT, GORT -4, and that measures oral reading rate, accuracy, and comprehension. Um, it's important because children who read slowly take longer to complete assignments and understand and remember less of what they've read. So that's the purpose of this. So they read a passage and then they're asked some multiple choice questions that are read by the examiner. Children can do poorly on this for a variety of reasons. Um, if they have an expressive language challenge, they're going to do poorly. Sometimes with multiple choice questions, they can't remember the choices or the order of the choices. So that, again, is a challenge. Weak memories, they have difficulty, again, retaining what the choices were. Um, and they can answer correctly by relying on verbal thinking skills, but not based on their understanding. So they can kind of figure out what makes sense, which answer makes sense, but they're not getting it based on the understanding of what the question is based on what they read. So that's another tool. They also use the Kaufman Test of Educational Achievement, second edition, the KTEA 2. It's an achievement battery. Um, it has important skills, reading, um, in reading. Again, these are all reading tests. And that one, the subtests are letter and word recognition, nonsense word decoding, reading comprehension, decoding fluency. Can they read nonsense words while being timed? And then word recognition fluency, which is again reading real words and being timed. There are comprehensive evaluations in reading, writing, and math. And by comprehensive, we just mean that it's an inventory of all the pertinent skills required for mastery in math, writing, and reading. Um, there's always related vocabulary, regardless of what it is, if it's reading, writing, or math. And sometimes it's keyboarding, it just depends. So now we're going to move on to my nemesis in the world, and we're just going to talk about this for a minute, statistics. And basically, the reason that statistics come into play here is because, as I described, all of our measures are comparisons. We are looking at something and we're comparing it to something else in order to make a determination of where the child is. So if you put that in your gas tank, you could describe your gas tank as half full, half empty, 50% mark. It could be at the 8-gallon mark if you have a 16-gallon tank. You can show that it's at 150 miles since you last filled up, different things like that. You're saying the exact same thing, but we're measuring it differently. And so that's what's so important about statistics, is because they measure the change. And you use objective tests to measure the change after an intervention, is basically the rule. So you're going to measure where your child is today. We're going to put in the intervention, which is our supports, accommodations, extra help, whatever we're doing, modifications of the curriculum. And then we're going to do the testing again. And we're going to compare this measure to this measure. And that is where the statistics come in. So, that's how you measure educational progress. So you're reporting the same information in different ways. So some of those ways are by using age equivalent scores, like we talked about earlier, grade equivalent scores, standard deviations, and percentile ranks. And as I said, we will talk about what standard scores, standard deviations, and percentile ranks are next week. But basically, we use the data to compare performance of an individual child to an entire group. And then we use it to compare the individual child to the individual child. And that's how we determine their strengths and weaknesses compared to their peer group, to the group of their same age, the group of their same grade, and to themselves and where they were before. So that is the sort of intro to testing, measurements, and stats. We're going to talk about the bell curve, which is the most important measure for you to understand, as well as we'll talk about the difference between a composite score, a subtest scatter, and raw scores versus standard scores, and all that stuff. That will be where we begin on Monday. And we will continue to build our IEP toolkit. If you have any questions, just please send me a message, call me, email me. I'm happy to take a portion of our learning and put it right where you need it to be. So I hope that you all have a wonderful, wonderful weekend. Happy Friday, happy sunshine. Kiss your loved ones, kiss your dogs, and have a great time. Bye. See you Monday.